I stared at the envelope in my hands, the glossy white paper feeling heavier than it should. My parents had handed it to me with that same forced smile they always reserved for family gatherings, the kind that pretends everything is perfect while hiding 1,000 secrets. I tore it open, expecting maybe a birthday card, a small note, something that acknowledged the years I had spent quietly wondering if I mattered at all. Instead, there it was, a thin, flimsy card with neat handwriting that read, "Sorry, your trust fund was lost. Happy birthday." My stomach dropped. Lost. How could something so important, something that should have been mine all these years, just disappear? I glanced at my cousins across the room, laughing with gifts piled high, the envelopes in their hands heavy with what I wasn't allowed to know. Anger flared in my chest, twisting with disbelief. 25 years I had been patient, obedient, loyal, and for what? To be cast aside while others thrived on the opportunities I was denied. My thoughts raced, each one sharper than the last, every memory of overlooked birthdays and ignored accomplishments pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. I clenched the card, the paper crumpling under the tension, and felt a bitter sting of betrayal I had long suspected, but never faced so openly. How could they pretend love while keeping wealth and opportunity from me? The room felt smaller, the laughter around me sharper, every smile from my family a reminder of how invisible I had been. In that instant, the celebration lost its warmth, replaced by a cold clarity. I had been deliberately kept in the dark, sidelined while life handed them favors I was never allowed to claim. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited a quiet determination that this moment, this insult, would not define me. If they thought they could erase my worth for 25 years, they were gravely mistaken. The anger simmered alongside a budding resolve, threading itself into every thought, every heartbeat. And for the first time in years, I realized that the story wasn't over, it was just beginning. I remember sitting at the kitchen table on my 8th birthday, a small cake with one lonely candle flickering in front of me, while my cousins tore into brightly wrapped presents in the living room. My parents clapped politely when I blew out the candle, but their attention quickly shifted back to the chaos of gifts and laughter across the hall. They always seemed to have time and energy for my siblings or cousins, but for me, the gestures were fleeting, the words perfunctory. Christmases were worse. The pile of presents for everyone else seemed endless, while my own gifts were often secondhand or hastily wrapped. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't measured in gifts, but the sting of neglect lingered. Every compliment, every proud glance, always seemed directed toward my siblings or cousins, and I became invisible by comparison. School achievements, trophies, and report cards brought only brief acknowledgement before fading into the background. Even my smallest successes were overshadowed, minimized, or quickly redirected to celebrate someone else. I'd watch my cousin open a shiny new bicycle and smile through the envy that bubbled inside, knowing the praise and attention would never be mine. The contrast was clear. They were always seen, always celebrated, while I quietly endured the neglect. I grew up learning to shrink, to remain polite while my accomplishments went unnoticed. That childhood of constant comparison, of quiet longing and invisible victories, shaped me into someone who learned to watch and wait. I learned to internalize my feelings, to bury disappointment beneath a veneer of smiles and obedience. But every ignored birthday, every overlooked achievement, added a weight that I carried silently. It left me yearning for recognition, for a moment when my worth could not be denied. Those early experiences, though painful, planted the seed of resilience and a quiet determination that when my moment came, it would be undeniable. By the time I hit my teenage years, the unease I had felt as a child began to crystallize into something sharper. I noticed the whispers between my parents when they thought I wasn't listening, the furtive glances at papers and bank statements I wasn't allowed to see. "You don't need to worry about that yet," my mom would say whenever I asked about the trust fund or family finances, her tone almost rehearsed. I hated the dismissiveness, the way they treated my curiosity like a nuisance rather than a legitimate question. One afternoon, I confronted my dad while he was organizing envelopes in his office. Why am I never included? Why do you pretend there's nothing for me? He looked up, startled, then laughed nervously. You're too young to understand. Focus on school. We'll talk about money later. That word later became a constant echo in my head, a promise that never came. My frustration grew alongside the small acts of rebellion I began to experiment with, sneaking into their files, keeping a record of hints and discrepancies, pushing boundaries to see if they'd crack. I just want the truth, I muttered to myself more times than I could count, pacing my room late at night. Every unanswered question, every brush off, felt like another wall between them and me, reinforcing that I was being deliberately left out. The tension gnawed at me, twisting into anger, suspicion, and a sense of helplessness. I longed for an explanation, for a single acknowledgement that I deserved more than they were giving me. Each subtle clue in envelope tucked away, a whispered conversation, a phone call, and it abruptly became a piece of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. And yet, they never faltered, never admitted anything, leaving me trapped in a maze of uncertainty. I remember thinking, if they could hide so much from me now, what else might they be keeping? The questions swirled endlessly, fueling my determination to uncover the truth myself. By the end of my teens, the rebellion wasn't loud or destructive. It was a quiet, simmering refusal to accept ignorance, a mental ledger of every slight, every hint, and every unanswered question. That simmering tension set the stage for the moment when the full truth would finally come crashing into my life. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to build my own life. But the shadows of my family's favoritism followed me relentlessly. Every time I brought up inheritance or my trust fund, my parents' answers were vague, dismissive, or loaded with excuses. You're too young to think about that, my dad would say, or we'll discuss it after graduation. But I noticed the subtle ways they prioritized my cousins helping with tuition, co-signing loans, sending lavish gifts for birthdays and holidays. My friends would talk about the financial help their families provided, and I felt that familiar pang of exclusion, a mix of FOMO and humiliation. I worked odd jobs, saved every penny, and still watched others receive opportunities that seemed effortlessly handed to them. Why is it always them? I would mutter to myself, frustration twisting into quiet resentment. The moral dilemma gnawed at me. I wanted to confront my parents, demand answers, but I also feared it would fracture the fragile peace at home or mark me as greedy. I tiptoed around questions, hoping for clarity. But clarity never came. Instead, their avoidance and selective generosity only deepened my suspicion. By the time graduation approached, I realized this wasn't oversight, it was deliberate. The envelope I would receive on my 25th birthday wasn't just a surprise. It was the culmination of decades of deception. And though I didn't know it yet, the cracks were widening, and my growing suspicion was about to collide with the truth in ways I could never have anticipated. After college, I dove headfirst into building my own life, determined not to rely on a family that had long ignored me. Long nights at cramped apartments, unpaid internships, and relentless overtime became my reality while I watched cousins and siblings glide through life, supported by the resources I had been denied. I remember paying my own tuition for advanced courses while my cousin received a full scholarship I could have had if only my parents had acknowledged my right. The unfairness weighed heavily on me. Every late night study session, every skipped social event, every penny I scrimped on was a quiet testament to my perseverance, contrasted sharply against their neglect. Sometimes I would sit in my small apartment, staring at the walls, and feel the crushing weight of loneliness, wondering if my efforts would ever be recognized or if I was destined to be invisible forever. I reminded myself that this struggle was shaping me, forging a resilience my family could never understand. But that didn't make the sting of their favoritism any less sharp. Friends would brag about family trips, luxury items, or financial assistance, and I'd smile politely while my stomach twisted with envy and frustration. Each achievement I earned felt bittersweet, proof of my strength, yes, but also a reminder of all the opportunities I had been denied. And yet, despite the injustice, a quiet determination grew inside me. I promised myself that someday, the sacrifices, the struggles, and the years of being overlooked would culminate in a moment where my worth would be undeniable, where recognition and justice would finally find their way to me. It started as a typical Monday, the kind where I trudged into the office feeling like another cog in a machine, invisible and replaceable. But that day, everything shifted. My manager called me into her office, eyes bright with excitement, and handed me a promotion letter I had earned months ago, but hadn't expected so soon. The recognition was official, tangible, a title, a raise, a nod to the countless hours I had poured into projects while my family remained oblivious to my capabilities. In that moment, I felt a subtle yet exhilarating surge of power. For the first time, I realized I wasn't as powerless as I had always been led to believe. I thought about the contrast between my life now and the one I had been forced to accept: overlooked birthdays, ignored achievements, invisible in family photos, while cousins basked in praise and financial security. I had clawed my way to this point, relying only on my determination, intelligence, and persistence. The taste of vindication was intoxicating, though quiet, a small victory that hinted at the larger reversals to come. I walked out of that office with my chest a little higher, the sting of old injustices tempered by the knowledge that I was capable, resourceful, and finally, in control of a piece of my destiny. As my 25th birthday approached, a strange tension settled over the house. My parents were unusually busy, darting in and out of rooms with hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I entered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden, a secret hovering just beyond my reach. Siblings teased me lightly about gifts, laughing in a way that felt sharper than usual, and I caught the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes whenever I glanced toward them. "Don't worry, it's just another ordinary birthday," my dad said when I pressed him about plans, his tone clipped to rehearse to sound genuine. Every conversation ended with deflection. Every glance felt calculated. And I felt that familiar fear creeping in, the fear of being replaced, of being overlooked, humiliated yet again in front of the very people who should have been on my side. I replayed past birthdays in my mind, each one a quiet lesson in patience and endurance, wondering if this year would be any different. The laughter, the whispers, and the avoided answers all layered together, forming a web of suspicion I couldn't ignore. My gut told me something monumental was about to happen, but I didn't know if it would be good or devastating. I felt trapped between anticipation and dread, the anxiety building with every passing day. And yet, beneath the tension, a flicker of resolve began to form. I would face whatever came with eyes wide open, ready to finally claim the truth I had been denied for so long. The day finally arrived, my 25th birthday, and the house buzzed with polite laughter and small talk that felt hollow beneath the surface. I carried a quiet apprehension, the unease of weeks threading through every interaction, every forced smile. My parents moved around the room with their practiced charm, exchanging pleasantries with relatives, but avoiding my questions whenever I tried to probe about gifts or family affairs. I could see it in their eyes, a flicker of worry, a twitch of hesitation whenever I leaned in too close. The party carried on, cousins opening lavish presents, friends exchanging congratulations, and I forced myself to remain calm, pretending ignorance even as my pulse raced. Then, Grandpa rose from his seat, clearing his throat with a weight that silenced the room instantly. "I think it's time the truth came out," he said, his voice steady, commanding attention. All eyes turned toward him, and I felt the collective curiosity of everyone in the room sharpen around me. "For 25 years, he continued, "your parents have hidden something very important from you." A chill ran down my spine, the long simmering tension reaching its breaking point. My parents' faces paled as whispers rose among the guests, unsure of what was coming. Grandpa held up a folder, thick with papers that gleamed like evidence of a crime long denied. "The $3 million trust fund. It was always yours," he declared, the words echoing like a verdict through the room. And for reasons I cannot condone, your parents kept it from you all these years. Gasps erupted. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father's hands trembled slightly as he fumbled for an explanation that did not exist. Cousins froze mid-laugh, their expressions twisting as realization and guilt spread across their faces. The psychological impact hit hard, the deceit laid bare, the manipulation exposed, and my vindication undeniable. I felt a surge of emotion, shock, relief, a righteous anger that burned through every corner of my body. The room seemed to shrink as the weight of truth pressed down, and I realized that for the first time, the power had shifted entirely. The parents who had orchestrated decades of control were rendered vulnerable, while I stood at the center, recognized, validated, and finally in command of my own story. In that moment, the injustice of the past dissolved into an almost cinematic sense of triumph. The crowd watched, captivated by the moral revelation unfolding, and I allowed myself a quiet smile, savoring the knowledge that the betrayal and concealment were exposed at last. It was a turning point I had waited a lifetime for, and nothing would ever be the same. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps, murmurs, and stunned silence. My parents stood frozen, their carefully curated composure crumbling as the reality of Grandpa's revelation sank in. This can't be true, my mother stammered, her voice trembling, eyes darting round the room as if someone might rescue her from exposure. My father swallowed hard, lips pressed tight, but the guilt was written plainly across his face, a silent confession more damning than any words could be. My cousins exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter from earlier replaced by awkward shuffles and whispered apologies. One cousin muttered, I didn't know, but the words felt hollow, failing to erase the years of inequality and favoritism. Siblings who had once teased me now avoided eye contact, cut between shock and envy, the skills of power shifting dramatically before them. I felt the tension radiate through the room as friends and family alike witnessed the full scope of deception. Every whisper, every glance, every drop fork became part of a cinematic tableau of public humiliation for the parents, a karmic justice delivered for decades of neglect. The contrast between past and present, weak versus exposed, invisible versus recognized, could not have been more pronounced. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile, savoring the satisfaction that finally, after years of patience, the scales had tipped. For the first time, the injustice I had endured was no longer hidden, and the audience, my friends, relatives, and even strangers could witness the full impact of truth. The parents who had wielded control so long now faced the consequences of their choices, their authority shattered, their deceit laid bare. And in the midst of it all, I felt a deep sense of relief, validation, and triumph, knowing that the karma long delayed had arrived in full force, irreversible and complete. As the chaos settled around me, I found a quiet corner to let the weight of everything sink in. Anger bubbled first, sharp and consuming, a wildfire fueled by years of being ignored, dismissed, and sidelined. I thought about every birthday overlooked, every achievement minimized, every smile I had forced while my family lavished attention on others. And then relief washed over me. A slow, intoxicating release. The truth finally revealed, the deception exposed, my worth undeniable. I felt empowered in a way I had never imagined, standing in a room where the balance of power had shifted entirely. The contrast was striking. The shy, invisible child who had watched cousins and siblings thrive now stood fully recognized, validated, and respected. Memories of past neglect clashed with the present reality, creating a profound sense of justice that reverberated through me. I understood, too, that this moment would resonate with anyone who had endured similar betrayal. The loneliness, the frustration, the quiet struggle to prove one's value. For them, and for me, there was a cathartic satisfaction in seeing patience, resilience, and integrity triumph over deceit and favoritism. In that reflection, I felt whole for the first time, a person not defined by years of neglect, but by the power and recognition I had earned. The anger had turned to strength, the pain into purpose, and the relief into a fierce determination to embrace the life I deserved. With the trust fund finally mine, the world opened in ways I had only dreamed of for decades. I moved into an apartment I had always admired, one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that reminded me of possibility rather than neglect. I invested in my career, started businesses I had only whispered about in journal entries, and finally felt the freedom to make choices on my own terms. Luxury was no longer a distant fantasy. It was part of the life I had built with determination and patience. Yet the transformation wasn't just about wealth, it was about independence, control, and reclaiming the power that had been denied to me for so long. I started using my resources to help others, supporting friends, funding scholarships, and giving back in ways that reflected the compassion I had cultivated while enduring neglect. I loved the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had earned this, that my efforts had not only created security, but also influence. The thrill of wish fulfillment once so out of reach was now tangible. Every time I looked back at my childhood struggles, I felt the stark contrast. They called me poor, invisible, incapable, and yet now I controlled my own destiny. The shift was not merely financial. It was deeply symbolic. I was finally recognized, not because anyone else decided I was worthy, but because I had fought for it, earned it, and transformed my life on my own terms. Weeks after my birthday, my parents began testing boundaries, subtly inserting themselves into decisions I had finally gained control over. "We just want to help you manage things," my mother said, her voice syrupy, the smile to practice to be sincere. My father added, "You know, it would mean a lot if we could guide some of your investments." I listened quietly, letting the words hang in the air, savoring the irony. For years, they had withheld everything, and now they assumed influence could be reclaimed with polite phrases. I took a deep breath, studying myself, then responded firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but my decisions are mine. I am fully capable of managing what has always been rightfully mine." Their mouths opened, shut, and opened again, searching for a rebuttal that I refused to give them. I could see the shock in their eyes as the tables turned completely. They were no longer in control, and my voice carried the weight they had never granted me. Cousins and siblings looked on, the power dynamics shifting visibly in the room. For the first time, I felt the satisfaction of asserting authority not through anger, but through calm, undeniable confidence. The past of neglect and exclusion was behind me. The present belonged entirely to me. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm, one where the balance of power had been irreversibly recalibrated. My parents' attempts at control dwindled, replaced by tentative gestures that no longer held authority over me. I reflected on everything: the years of neglect, the small victories, the ultimate revelation, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the money alone, but for the clarity it brought, the lessons it taught, and the self-respect I had fought to claim. I understood now that empowerment was not just about wealth or recognition. It was about asserting my worth and refusing to be diminished. Watching my family adjust to this new reality offered its own quiet satisfaction. They had learned, painfully, that deceit carries consequences, and I had endured to emerge stronger. The bitterness of betrayal lingered, yes, but it was tempered by the satisfaction of justice served and the validation I had longed for all my life. I was no longer the overlooked child, no longer invisible in my own story. I had claimed my place, my voice, and my dignity, and in that, I found both peace and triumph. The celebration that evening felt different from any birthday I had ever experienced. The house, once heavy with tension and secrecy, now vibrated with genuine laughter and warmth. Friends and supportive relatives surrounded me, toasting to my growth, my resilience, and the triumph over years of neglect. Cousins who had once overshadowed me now watched with quiet admiration, no longer gatekeepers of my worth. I felt a deep sense of closure, the symbolic victory of this gathering marking the end of a long chapter of betrayal and the beginning of one I controlled entirely. Grandpa leaned close as we raised our glasses, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "You know," he whispered with a knowing grin, There's always more to learn about a family. I laughed softly, feeling the thrill of possibility, the hint of mystery still lingering in the air. It was a moment of reflection, empowerment, and subtle suspense, leaving me and anyone who had followed my journey grateful for justice delivered, satisfied by recognition, yet reminded that life always has another secret waiting just round the corner. The night ended not with bitterness, but with triumph, love, and a quiet promise of more revelations to come.